The stagecoach wheels hit a rut so deep that Beatrice Zimmerman's head nearly cracked against the wooden ceiling. And in that jolting moment, she wondered if dying on the trail might be preferable to meeting the stranger she was supposed to marry. The year was 1879, and the journey from Boston to Fort Worth, Texas had taken 3 weeks of dust, discomfort, and growing dread that coiled tighter in her stomach with every passing mile. She clutched her carpetbag closer, feeling the silver-backed hairbrush her mother had given her pressing against her ribs through the fabric, a reminder of everything refined and civilized she was leaving behind. The other passengers had disembarked at various stops along the way, leaving Beatrice alone for the final stretch into Fort Worth. She pressed her gloved hand against the window, peering through the film of prairie dust at the endless expanse of brown grass and blue sky. Boston had buildings that touched the clouds, cobblestone streets, gas lamps that turned night into a gentler version of day. This land looked like God had forgotten to finish it, leaving it raw and exposed under a sun that beat down without mercy. The advertisement had seemed reasonable enough when she had answered it 6 months ago. A prosperous merchant in Fort Worth seeking an educated wife, someone to bring culture and refinement to his growing business empire. The letters that followed had been polite, even charming. Gregory Whitmore wrote about his general store, his ambitions, his desire for a proper helpmate who could read and cipher and help him rise in society. He sent money for her passage. He promised a good life. What the letters had not mentioned was that he was 53 years old, already buried 2 wives, and had a fondness for whiskey that the whole town knew about. Beatrice learned this from a gossiping woman at the last way station, who seemed to take great pleasure in watching the color drain from her face. But by then, it was too late to turn back. She had exactly $4 to her name, no family willing to take her in after her father's debts had consumed everything, and pride too stubborn to let her crawl back to Boston a failure. The stagecoach driver called out something unintelligible, and the horses slowed. Beatrice smoothed her traveling dress, a sensible gray wool that was far too hot for Texas, but had been the most practical thing she owned. She pinched her cheeks to bring color to them and straightened her hat. If she was going to meet her fate, she would meet it with her spine straight and her chin high. Fort Worth revealed itself in stages. First came the scattered homesteads, then the stockyards with their smell of cattle and manure that made her eyes water, then finally the actual town itself, a collection of wooden buildings that looked like a strong wind might knock them over. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with establishments that seemed to consist primarily of saloons. Men in dusty clothes and wide-brimmed hats stood in clusters, turning to watch as the stagecoach rumbled past. The stage stopped in front of a building marked Fort Worth Depot, and the driver climbed down to open the door. Beatrice accepted his weathered hand and stepped down onto Texas soil for the first time. The heat hit her like a physical force, different from Boston summers, drier and more relentless. She took a breath and tasted dust. "Miss Zimmerman," a voice called from behind her. She turned to find a woman approaching, maybe 30 years old, with auburn hair and a practical calico dress. Her face was kind but tired, lines around her eyes that spoke of hard living. "I am Mrs. Sarah Hawthorne. Mr. Whitmore sent me to collect you. He is occupied with business at the moment." The first test, Beatrice thought. The groom could not even be bothered to meet his bride at the station. She kept her expression neutral. How thoughtful of him. Mrs. Hawthorne's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Come along. I will take you to the hotel where you can freshen up. The wedding is planned for tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" Beatrice's composure cracked. "But I have only just arrived." Mr. Whitmore is an efficient man. Mrs. Hawthorne's tone suggested this was not necessarily a compliment. She picked up one of Beatrice's bags. He has the preacher booked, the papers drawn up. He runs his personal affairs like his business affairs, everything on schedule. They walked down the main street, and Beatrice tried not to stare at how different everything was. The women she passed wore simpler clothes, faded from sun and washing. The men carried guns openly on their hips. A dog barked from an alley. Somewhere a piano played badly, and it was not even noon yet. The hotel was called the Cattleman's Rest, a two-story wooden structure that looked slightly more permanent than its neighbors. Mrs. Hawthorne led her inside, where a clerk with impressive mutton chops checked her in. The room upstairs was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the street. "I will send someone with hot water," Mrs. Hawthorne said, "and I will return this evening to see how you are settling in. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, at the First Methodist Church." After she left, Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel the full weight of her situation. 22 years old, 1,000 miles from home, about to marry a man she had never met because the alternative was starvation or worse. She thought about her mother, dead 5 years now from pneumonia. She thought about her father, dead 2 years later from grief and bad investments. She thought about her brother who had gone to sea and never sent a letter back. She did not cry. She had learned that crying solved nothing. Instead, she unpacked her few belongings, washed her face in the basin, and changed into a fresh dress. Then she did what she always did when life overwhelmed her. She went for a walk. Fort Worth was raw, but it was not without its charms. She walked past the general store that presumably belonged to her future husband, its windows displaying everything from flour sacks to fancy ribbons. She passed a restaurant advertising beefsteak, a barber shop, a gunsmith, a dress shop with fabric that had clearly been shipped from the East. At the end of the street stood a small whitewashed church, and beyond that, the land opened up into prairie that seemed to go on forever. She was standing there, looking at that endless horizon, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. "You planning on walking out into that?" A male voice, touched with amusement. Beatrice turned sharply. The man on the horse was young, maybe 26 or 27, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-green. He wore dusty clothes, a battered hat, and had the weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors. A bandana was tied around his neck, and a coiled rope hung from his saddle. "I am simply looking," she said, hearing how prim her Boston accent sounded. "Looking is fine. Walking is another matter. Folks from back east do not always understand how big empty is out here." He touched the brim of his hat. "No offense meant, none taken." She studied him more carefully. There was something direct about his gaze, appraising but not rude. "Are you a cowboy?" His mouth twitched. "That is what they call us. I prefer to think of myself as a rancher, but I suppose it amounts to the same thing. Name is Samuel Quinn. I run cattle on land about 10 miles northwest of here. Beatrice Zimmerman." She offered her hand without thinking, then realized that perhaps ladies did not shake hands with strange cowboys in Texas. But he took it anyway, his grip firm and brief. "You are the one come to marry old Whitmore," he said, and it was not a question. News travels quickly. Town this size, news travels before it even happens. He studied her with those unusual eyes. "You got family coming to the wedding?" "No." Something shifted in his expression. "That's so." An awkward silence stretched between them. Beatrice became very aware that she was standing alone with a strange man on the edge of town, something that would have been scandalous in Boston. Here, no one seemed to even notice. "Well," Samuel Quinn said finally, "Welcome to Fort Worth, Miss Zimmerman. I hope you find what you are looking for here." He turned his horse and rode back toward the main street, leaving Beatrice standing alone again. She watched him go, something about the encounter leaving her unsettled in a way she could not name. That evening, Mrs. Hawthorne returned with dinner on a tray, fried chicken and potatoes and greens cooked with bacon. They ate together in Beatrice's room, and the older woman told her about the town, filling in details about who was who and what was what. She was tactful about Mr. Whitmore, saying only that he was a shrewd businessman and a pillar of the community. "He will provide well for you," Mrs. Hawthorne said. "That is worth something." But Beatrice heard the unspoken word. Mrs. Hawthorne chose her words carefully. "He is set in his ways. His first 2 wives, God rest them, they learned to work around his moods. He is not a cruel man, but he is not particularly warm either." "I see." Beatrice set down her fork, her appetite gone. "May I ask you something, Mrs. Hawthorne?" "Sarah, please." "Sarah, if you were me, would you go through with it?" The other woman was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know your circumstances, dear, but I will say this. Life out here is hard, even with a husband to provide for you. Without one," she shook her head, "there are not many respectable options for a woman alone. So if you are asking me if you should marry Gregory Whitmore, I cannot answer that. But if you are asking me if you need to marry someone, well, that is a different question with a different answer." After Sarah left, Beatrice tried to sleep but could not. She lay in the narrow bed, listening to the sounds of Fort Worth at night. Laughter from the saloons, horses moving past, once the crack of gunfire that made her sit bolt upright before she realized no one else seemed alarmed by it. This was the world she had chosen, or at least the world that circumstance had forced upon her. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the realization that today was her wedding day. Her stomach churned. She rose, washed, and put on her best dress, a blue silk that her mother had made for her 3 years ago. It was outdated by Boston standards but still fine by Fort Worth measures. She arranged her dark hair as best she could with the silver-backed brush, pinning it up in a style that was elegant but practical. At 8:30, Sarah Hawthorne knocked on her door. She had brought flowers, wildflowers from the prairie, tied with a ribbon. "Every bride should have flowers," she said simply. They walked together to the church. It was a clear morning, already warm, and the dust from the street clung to the hem of Beatrice's blue dress. The church was small, with plain wooden pews and simple windows. A handful of people were already inside. Curious townspeople come to witness the stranger from the East marry, one of their own. Gregory Whitmore stood at the front of the church with the preacher. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick around the middle, with gray hair and a face that might have been handsome once but had been coarsened by years and whiskey. He wore a good suit that was slightly too tight. When he saw Beatrice walking up the aisle, his expression remained neutral, assessing her like he might assess merchandise in his store. She took her place beside him, and he gave her a brief nod. "Miss Zimmerman." "Mr. Whitmore." The preacher began the ceremony. He had a droning voice that seemed to flatten all the poetry out of the wedding service. Beatrice heard the words as if from a distance. To have and to hold, for better or worse, in sickness and health. She tried to picture herself living these vows with the stranger beside her, and could not quite manage it. If any person can show just cause why they may not be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The door at the back of the church banged open. Everyone turned. Samuel Quinn stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, dusty from riding. His eyes found Beatrice. "I got just cause," he said. The church erupted in whispers. Gregory Whitmore's face turned an alarming shade of red. The preacher looked like he wished he had never asked the question. "This is outrageous," Whitmore sputtered. "Who do you think you are, Quinn? I am someone who cannot stand by and watch something wrong happen." Samuel walked down the aisle, his boots loud on the wooden floor. "Miss Zimmerman, do you know what you are marrying?" "Mr. Quinn, I hardly think this is appropriate," Beatrice said, but her voice shook. "That is the damn truth. It is not appropriate, but neither is lying to a woman about who you are." He turned to face Whitmore. "You going to tell her, or should I?" "There is nothing to tell except that you are drunk or crazy." "I am neither. I am just tired of watching you use people up." Samuel looked at Beatrice again. His first wife died in childbirth because he would not pay for the doctor to come. His second wife died of pneumonia because he kept her working in the store even when she was sick. Said they could not afford to close. He runs through employees like water because he pays them half what they are worth. And that general store you think is so prosperous. It is mortgaged to the rafters. He is drowning in debt. "These are lies," Whitmore said, but there was something hollow in his voice. The preacher cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should postpone the ceremony until these matters can be clarified." "There is nothing to clarify." But Whitmore's eyes slid away from Beatrice's face. She felt something break open inside her, not sadness but anger, clean and pure. "Is it true, any of it?" Whitmore did not answer immediately, which was answer enough. "Get out," she said quietly. "Now see here, you are being irrational. A woman in your position cannot afford to be particular." "Get out." The words came louder, echoing in the small church. "I will not marry you, not today, not ever." She pushed past him, past the preacher, past the gawking townspeople. Sarah Hawthorne caught her arm as she headed for the door. "Where will you go?" she asked, her face worried. "I do not know, anywhere but here." "Come on," Samuel Quinn said from behind her. "I will take you somewhere safe." "I do not need your help," Beatrice said, even as tears started to blur her vision. "I do not need anyone's help." "Maybe not. But I am offering it anyway." She wanted to refuse him. She wanted to storm off in righteous independence. But the practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive this long, spoke louder. She was alone in a strange town with $4 and no prospects. Pride was a luxury she could not afford. "Fine," she said. "But only until I can figure out what to do next." His horse was tied outside the church, a solid sorrel mare with patient eyes. He mounted first, then offered Beatrice his hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it and letting him pull her up behind him. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from falling, and she could feel the solid warmth of him through his shirt. They rode out of Fort Worth with the whole town watching, and Beatrice knew that her reputation was probably ruined. A mail-order bride who refused her groom and rode off with a cowboy instead. The gossip would be delicious. She found that she did not care. Samuel guided the horse northwest, away from town and into the open prairie. They rode in silence for a long time, the sun climbing higher, the land unfolding in gentle rolls of grass and occasional stands of scrubby trees. Beatrice had never been on a horse before, and the motion was strange, jarring at first and then almost rhythmic. She held on tighter when they went down a steep bank, and Samuel put his hand over hers briefly, steadying her. After about an hour, a house appeared in the distance. It was not large, just a simple cabin with a barn nearby and a corral with horses. But it looked solid, well built, like it belonged to the land it sat on. "This is your ranch?" Beatrice asked. "Such as it is. About 300 acres, 100 head of cattle. I built the house myself 2 years ago." He helped her down from the horse, and she stood on shaky legs, her blue silk dress dusty and wrinkled. The reality of what she had just done was starting to settle in. She had destroyed her only chance at security, climbed onto a horse with a man she did not know, and ridden out to the middle of nowhere. "Miss Zimmerman," Samuel said, and his voice was gentler than before, "I have a spare room. You can stay here as long as you need to figure things out. I will not touch you or bother you or expect anything from you. You have my word on that." "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why did you stop the wedding?" He looked away out at the prairie. "Because I heard about you coming to town. I heard about Whitmore's plans. And I thought about those 2 wives of his buried in the cemetery, and I could not let there be a third. That is all." But it was not all. She could see that in the way he held himself, in the careful distance he kept from her. There was something more, something he was not saying. She was too tired to push for it now. "I accept your offer," she said, "and I thank you for it, though I know I did not sound grateful before. You sounded like someone whose world just got turned upside down. That is understandable." He showed her the house, which was sparse but clean. The main room had a fireplace, a table with chairs, a shelf of books that surprised her. The spare room was tiny, barely big enough for the narrow bed it contained, but it had a window and a door that closed. Her own space. "I need to go check on the cattle," Samuel said. "There is food in the cold box. Help yourself to anything. I will be back before dark." After he left, Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed in her blue silk dress and let herself feel the full enormity of what had happened. She had come to Texas to find security and instead had found chaos. She had no money, no prospects, no plan. She was dependent on the charity of a man she had met yesterday, and yet, underneath the fear and uncertainty, there was something else. A sense of possibility, fragile and new. She had said no. She had walked away. She had chosen unknown hardship over certain misery. That had to count for something. She changed out of the silk dress into her simpler traveling clothes and went to explore the house more thoroughly. The kitchen was basic but functional, with a cast iron stove and a good supply of dry goods. The books on the shelf were an eclectic mix: agricultural guides, a battered copy of Shakespeare's sonnets, a book on Texas history, several novels by Dickens. This man was more educated than she had expected. She found flour and salt and a bit of lard and decided to make biscuits. It was something to do, something useful. By the time Samuel returned, the smell of baking filled the small house. He stopped in the doorway, surprise on his face. "You did not have to do that." "I know, I wanted to." They ate the biscuits with butter and honey, sitting across from each other at the table. The silence was awkward at first, neither quite knowing what to say. Finally, Beatrice asked, "How did you come to be a rancher?" "Started as a ranch hand when I was 15. My father died when I was young and my mother remarried a man who did not want me around. So I went to work. Saved every penny for 10 years. Bought this land 3 years ago, built the house, bought the cattle. It is not much, but it is mine. It is more than most people have." "I suppose that is true." He studied her across the table. "What about you? How did a Boston lady end up answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride?" So she told him. About her father's death and his debts, about losing everything, about having nowhere to turn. He listened without interrupting, his gray-green eyes steady on her face. "That is a hard road," he said when she finished. "Everyone has a hard road. Mine is just different from yours." "Maybe so." He stood and began clearing the plates. "Tomorrow we can talk about what you want to do. Whether you want to go back east or try to find work in town or something else. But tonight, you just rest. You have had enough upheaval for one day." Beatrice slept better than she expected in the narrow bed, exhausted by emotion and travel. She woke to the sound of roosters and lights streaming through the window. For a moment, she forgot where she was, and then it all came rushing back. She dressed and went out to the main room. Samuel was already gone, but he had left coffee warming on the stove and a note saying he would be back by mid-morning. She drank the coffee, which was strong and bitter and nothing like the tea she preferred, and tried to think about her options. She could use her $4 to buy a stagecoach ticket back east, though it would not get her all the way to Boston. She could look for work in Fort Worth, though she was not sure what kind of work a woman with her skills could find in a frontier town. Or she could stay here, at least temporarily, and try to figure something else out. The problem was that none of those options felt right. Going back east meant failure, returning to a place where she had nothing and no one. Working in town meant facing the gossip and judgment, and possibly running into Gregory Whitmore. Staying here meant accepting charity from a stranger, becoming a burden. She was still wrestling with these thoughts when Samuel returned, leading his horse. He looked tired, dust coating his clothes and face. "Lost a calf to coyotes last night," he said by way of greeting. "Spent half the morning tracking the pack. I am sorry," he shrugged. "It happens. Part of ranching." He poured himself coffee and sat at the table. "Have you thought about what you want to do?" "I have thought about little else, but I have not reached any conclusions." "Then let me make a suggestion." He wrapped his hands around the tin coffee cup. "Stay here for a while, a few weeks, maybe a month, help out around the house. In exchange, you get room and board and time to figure things out without pressure. When you decide what you want to do, I will help you do it. Whether that is going back east or staying in Texas or something else entirely." "That is very generous. It is practical. I could use help with the cooking and cleaning, and you need a place to stay. Simple as that." But it was not simple, and they both knew it. A man and a woman living alone together, unmarried, would cause talk. It would confirm every scandalous assumption people were already making about them. "What about your reputation?" Beatrice asked. "And mine, what is left of it? I stopped caring about my reputation years ago, and yours is already being gossiped about in town. Might as well give them something real to talk about." He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger. "Besides, out here, people have enough to worry about just surviving. They do not have time for much else." Beatrice thought about it. The offer was practical, even generous, and the truth was she had nowhere else to go. "All right," she said. 1 month, then I will decide what to do next." 1 month, he agreed. They shook hands across the table, a business arrangement between two people who needed each other. It should have felt cold and transactional. Instead, Beatrice felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. The first week was an adjustment. Beatrice had never cooked over a wood stove, or cleaned a house without servants, or done any of the 100 small tasks that were simply part of life on a ranch. Samuel was patient with her failures, showing her how to manage the fire in the stove, how to pump water from the well without making her arms ache, how to sweep the floor so the dust did not just resettle immediately. In turn, she brought her own skills to bear. She organized his chaotic pantry, set up a proper system for supplies. She mended his clothes, which had been making do with crude repairs for too long. She read to him in the evenings from his books, and they discovered a shared love of Dickens and a shared disdain for pretentious poetry. They developed a rhythm, an easy partnership. He woke early and went out to tend the cattle. She made breakfast and cleaned the house. He came back at midday for dinner, which was what she would have called lunch, but here was the main meal. They talked while they ate about everything and nothing. She told him about Boston, about the theaters and libraries and crowds of people. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle market, about his dreams of expanding his herd. In the afternoons, he worked on whatever needed doing, mending fences or breaking horses or any of the endless tasks that ranching required. She took care of the house, the cooking, the garden that was just starting to grow behind the cabin. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, and she read or sewed while he worked on leather or accounts. It was peaceful in a way that Beatrice had never experienced. There was no pretension here, no social climbing, no keeping up appearances. Just work and rest, and the simple satisfaction of a day well spent. But there were tensions, too. The awareness of each other that grew as they shared close quarters. The way she noticed the strength in his hands, the way he moved with unconscious grace. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching, something hungry and yearning in his eyes that he quickly shuddered when she glanced up. 2 weeks into her stay, Samuel asked if she would like to ride out with him to check the cattle. She agreed, curious to see more of the ranch. He had a gentle mare named Daisy that he saddled for her, showing her how to mount properly, how to hold the reins, how to sit, so she would not ache too badly later. They rode out across the prairie, and Beatrice felt a freedom she had never known in Boston. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, and the sky was so big it seemed impossible. They rode for an hour before they reached the area where the cattle grazed, 100 brown and white shapes scattered across the grassland. "They are smaller than I expected," Beatrice said. "Longhorns. They are tough, good for this climate. Not much meat on them compared to eastern cattle, but they survive." He rode through the herd, checking for injuries or illness, and Beatrice followed. She watched how he worked, confident and competent at home in this landscape in a way she could not yet imagine being. But she was learning. Every day, she understood a little more about this new world she had found herself in. On the way back, they stopped by a creek to let the horses drink. Samuel dismounted and helped Beatrice down, his hands on her waist, and for a moment they stood very close. She could smell him, sweat and leather and sun-warmed cotton. His eyes met hers and something passed between them, electric and undeniable. Then he stepped back, putting careful distance between them. "We should head back," he said, his voice rough. That night, Beatrice lay in her narrow bed and admitted to herself what she had been avoiding for days. She was falling in love with Samuel Quinn. It was foolish, dangerous, impossible. She barely knew him. She was dependent on his charity. And there was nothing to suggest he felt the same way, beyond those brief moments when she caught him looking at her. But the heart did not care about practicality or logic. Her heart was making decisions her head had no say in. The next morning, Samuel announced he needed to ride into town for supplies. "Do you want to come with me, or would you rather stay here?" Beatrice considered. She would have to face Fort Worth eventually. She could not hide on the ranch forever. "I will come," she said. They rode together into town, Beatrice behind Samuel on his horse since Daisy had thrown a shoe and could not make the trip. Fort Worth looked the same as it had 2 weeks ago, but Beatrice felt different. She held her head high as they rode down the main street, ignoring the stares and whispers. Samuel stopped at the general store, not Whitmore's but a smaller establishment owned by a man named Tucker. While he ordered supplies, Beatrice wandered the aisles, looking at the goods for sale. She was examining a bolt of calico when she heard a voice behind her. "Miss Zimmerman." She turned to find Sarah Hawthorne, basket on her arm, smiling at her. "Mrs. Hawthorne, Sarah, how nice to see you. I hoped I might run into you. How are you managing out at the Quinn Ranch?" "Well enough, thank you." Sarah stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I want you to know that I think you did the right thing, walking away from that wedding. Gregory Whitmore is showing his true colors now, drinking more than ever, complaining to anyone who will listen about how you humiliated him. It is quite satisfying to watch, actually." Beatrice felt a weight lift that she had not known she was carrying. "Thank you for saying that. Samuel Quinn is a good man, a bit rough around the edges, but good. You could do much worse." Sarah's eyes twinkled. And between you and me, you could not do much better either." After they left the store, supplies loaded on the horse, Samuel led her down a side street to a small building with a sign reading Fort Worth Telegraph Office. "Wait here a moment," he said, and went inside. Beatrice waited in the shade of the building, watching the town go about its business. A few people nodded at her, more curious than hostile. Perhaps Sarah was right. Perhaps her scandal was already old news. Samuel emerged a few minutes later, looking satisfied. "Done. We can head back now." "What did you do?" "Sent a telegram to my lawyer in Abilene about a business matter." He did not elaborate, and she did not press. On the ride home, Beatrice found herself noticing details she had missed before. The way Samuel sat in the saddle, relaxed and easy. The way he touched his hat brim to people they passed. The way his voice changed when he spoke to his horse, gentler and almost affectionate. She was learning him, the way she might learn a new language, and every detail felt precious. That evening, as she was preparing supper, Samuel came in from the barn with something in his hands. "A rabbit, freshly killed, already gutted. Caught it in a snare this morning," he said. "Thought we could have it for supper." Beatrice stared at the rabbit, at its soft brown fur and closed eyes. In Boston, meat came from the butcher, cleaned and cut and ready to cook. This was something else entirely. "I do not know how to prepare it," she admitted. "It needs to be skinned. I can do it if you would rather not watch." Beatrice thought about that. She thought about how she had come to Texas expecting one life and found another. She thought about how soft she was, how ignorant of the basic realities of survival. She thought about what it meant to live here, to truly belong to this place. "No," she said. "I want to learn. Will you teach me?" Something shifted in Samuel's expression, approval and something deeper. "All right then. Come on outside where we have more room." He set up a work area behind the house, hanging the rabbit from a hook and laying out a sharp knife. Beatrice stood beside him, watching as he made the first cut, showing her how to work the skin free from the flesh without tearing it. "It is not pretty work," he said, "but it is necessary. Out here you cannot afford to be squeamish." He guided her hands, showing her where to cut and pull. The rabbit's body was still warm and Beatrice felt her stomach turn. But she kept working, determined not to show weakness. Samuel talked her through each step, patient and matter-of-fact, until finally the skin came free and the rabbit was ready for cooking. "Well done," he said, and the pride in his voice made her feel 10 feet tall. She washed her hands in the basin, scrubbing away the blood and fur. Her hands were shaking slightly, from exertion or emotion she was not sure. Samuel stood beside her, washing his own hands. "That was harder than I expected," she said. "Most things worth doing are, but you did not quit. That is what matters." She looked at him, at his weathered face and steady eyes, and felt her heart turn over in her chest. This man, who had stopped her wedding and taken her in, and was teaching her how to survive in this harsh land. This man, who treated her like an equal even though she knew so much less than he did. This man who made her feel more alive than she had ever felt in Boston. "Thank you," she said, though the words felt inadequate for everything she was feeling. "For what?" "For teaching me. For being patient with me. For giving me a chance to become someone different than who I was." His eyes held hers, and she saw her own feelings reflected there, warm and real. But he only nodded and turned away. "We should get that rabbit cooked. I am hungry enough to eat a whole steer." They cooked the rabbit together, Beatrice following Samuel's instructions for seasoning and roasting it. It was gamier than chicken, but tender and flavorful. They ate in comfortable silence, and Beatrice thought about how good simple food tasted when you had worked hard for it. After supper, as she was washing the dishes, Samuel said, "There is something I need to tell you." Her hands stilled in the water. "What is it?" That telegram I sent today. It was to my lawyer, like I said, but not about business." He took a breath. "I was inquiring about what it would take to homestead more land, to expand the ranch. The government has programs for settlers, giving away land to people willing to work it. That sounds like a good opportunity. It is. But there is a catch. The best benefits go to married men. They get twice as much land as single men." He was not looking at her, his eyes fixed on the table. "I have been thinking about it for a while, about finding someone to marry, someone who could be a true partner in building this place up. But I had not met anyone I could imagine sharing my life with. Until now." Beatrice's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must hear it. "Samuel, I am not asking you to marry me," he said quickly. "I know that would be crazy. You have only been here 2 weeks. You barely know me. And you did not come all the way to Texas to marry a rancher who is barely scraping by." He finally looked at her. "But I wanted you to know how I feel. That I care about you. That these past 2 weeks have been the best of my life. And if you ever thought you might want to stay permanently, I would be the happiest man alive." She stood there with her hands in the dishwater, her whole future balanced on a knife's edge. She could say no, keep things as they were, maintain the careful distance they had been observing. Or she could take a leap into the unknown, trust her heart over her head, choose possibility over safety. "I care about you too," she said softly. "More than I should, probably. More than is wise." "Nothing about any of this has been wise. No." She dried her hands on a towel and turned to face him fully. "But maybe wisdom is overrated." He stood, moving toward her slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted to. She did not step back. He reached out and cupped her face in his calloused hand, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I want to kiss you," he said. "But only if you want that too. I want that too." He kissed her gently, carefully, like she was something precious. His lips were warm and tasted like coffee, and Beatrice felt something inside her come alive. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating as fast as her own. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I should not have done that," he said. "Yes, you should have. We should take things slow. Give you time to be sure. Samuel Quinn, I survived 3 weeks on a stagecoach, stood up to a man twice my size at my own wedding, and learned how to skin a rabbit today. I think I can handle knowing my own mind." He laughed, real and delighted. "I suppose you can at that." But they did take things slow, at least in physical terms. For the next 2 weeks, they courted each other in the old-fashioned sense, learning each other's histories and hopes and dreams. Samuel told her about growing up poor, about the stepfather who beat him, about leaving home at 15 and never looking back. She told him about her mother's illness, her father's decline, the loneliness of being the only one left. They kissed goodnight at her bedroom door, sweet kisses that left both of them aching for more, but understanding that patience mattered. Building a foundation mattered. This was not a marriage of convenience like what she had almost had with Whitmore. This was something real, something that deserved to be built carefully. One morning, Samuel woke her before dawn. "Get dressed. I want to show you something." She dressed quickly and followed him outside. He had 2 horses saddled, his mare and the gentle Daisy. They rode east, toward the rising sun, across prairie that glowed gold in the early light. After about 20 minutes, they crested a rise, and Beatrice gasped. The land fell away in a gentle valley, with a creek running through it and cottonwood trees growing along the banks. The grass was thick and green, and wildflowers dotted the meadow in splashes of color. It was the most beautiful thing she had seen in Texas. "This is the land I want to homestead," Samuel said. 160 acres if I can prove it up. Build a bigger house, run more cattle, maybe plant some crops, make a real go of it. It is beautiful. It would be a lot of work, years of work probably, and no guarantee of success. Droughts come, cattle die, markets crash. It is a risk. Beatrice looked at the valley, seeing not just what it was but what it could be. A house in the meadow, cattle grazing, children playing by the creek, a life built from nothing but will and work. All of life is a risk, she said. At least this risk would be ours. He turned to look at her, hope naked on his face. Does that mean what I think it means? If you are asking me to marry you, then yes. My answer is yes. He dismounted in one smooth motion and came to stand beside her horse, reaching up to take her hands. Beatrice Zimmerman, will you marry me? Not because you have no other choice, but because you want to. Because you love this life and want to build it with me. Yes, she said, tears blurring her vision. Yes, I will marry you. I do love this life, and I love you. He pulled her down from the horse and kissed her thoroughly, deeply, kissing her like a man who has been given everything he ever wanted. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms around his neck, her heart full to bursting. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Samuel said, "We should head back and ride into town. Get the preacher to marry us before you come to your senses." "I am not going to come to my senses. This is my senses." They rode back to the ranch, packed a few things, and made the journey to Fort Worth. It was midday when they arrived, the sun high and hot. They went straight to the First Methodist Church, where Beatrice had almost married Gregory Whitmore just a month ago. The irony was not lost on her. The preacher was surprised to see them, but agreed to perform the ceremony. Sarah Hawthorne and her husband stood as witnesses, Sarah looking delighted and dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. There were no flowers this time, no fancy dress, no pretense. Just Beatrice in a simple cotton dress and Samuel in his cleanest shirt, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. The preacher got to the part about objections, and Beatrice and Samuel looked at each other and laughed. No one burst through the doors this time. No one had any reason to object. This was right in a way that her first almost wedding had never been. "I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride." Samuel did, tenderly and thoroughly, and Beatrice felt joy so pure it was almost painful. She was married. She was Beatrice Quinn now, wife of a rancher, woman of the West. It felt more real than anything in her old life ever had. They had dinner at the restaurant to celebrate, beefsteak and potatoes and apple pie, and Sarah and her husband joined them. Other townspeople stopped by their table to offer congratulations, and Beatrice realized that the gossip had shifted. She was no longer the scandalous mail-order bride who ran off with a cowboy. She was Samuel Quinn's wife, a respectable married woman, and that changed everything. As they rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, Beatrice thought about how much had changed in just 1 month. She had arrived in Texas, expecting to marry one man, and had married another. She had expected to live in town and was living on a ranch. She had expected comfort and security and had found challenge and uncertainty. But she had also found love, real and true, and that made all the difference. That night, in the small cabin that was now her home, Samuel carried her over the threshold. She laughed at the old-fashioned gesture, but she was touched too. He set her down gently, his hands lingering on her waist. "I want you to know something," he said. "This cabin is not much. The ranch is not much. I cannot give you the life you would have had in Boston. I do not want that life. I want this one. Even so, I promise you, Beatrice, I will spend the rest of my days trying to be worthy of you, trying to give you a good life, a happy life." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. "You already have, just by being you. Just by seeing me as I am and thinking that is enough." They made love that night for the first time, awkward and tender and perfect. Afterward, Lying in Samuel's arms in the narrow bed, Beatrice thought about grace. Not the social grace she had been taught in Boston, the proper way to hold a teacup or address a letter, but something deeper, the grace of second chances, the grace of new beginnings, the grace of love given freely and received gratefully. "Samuel," she said into the darkness. "MMM. That rabbit we cooked a few weeks ago, we never said grace before eating it." "I suppose we did not. I am not much for praying, to be honest. I am not particularly devout myself, but my mother always said grace before meals. It was important to her, being thankful for what we had." He was quiet for a moment. What did she used to say? Just something simple. "Thank you for this food, for this day, for this life. Amen." That is nice, short and to the point. Beatrice propped herself up on one elbow, looking at him in the moonlight that came through the window. "Would you be willing to do that? Say grace before meals? Not for God particularly, but just as a way of remembering to be grateful." He smiled. "I think I could manage that. Lord knows I have plenty to be grateful for now, as do I." He pulled her close again, kissing her forehead. "Then we will say grace, starting tomorrow, every meal. You taught me that, the importance of gratitude, and I taught you how to skin a rabbit. Seems like a fair trade." She laughed against his chest. "A very fair trade." They fell asleep like that, tangled together in the small bed, the first night of their married life. The next morning, Beatrice woke to find Samuel already up, making coffee. She dressed and joined him in the kitchen, and he pulled her in for a long, thorough kiss. "Good morning, Mrs. Quinn." "Good morning, husband." They made breakfast together, flapjacks and bacon, working in easy harmony. When they sat down to eat, Samuel reached across the table and took her hand. "Should you say it, or should I?" "You can," Beatrice said. He bowed his head and she did the same. "Thank you for this food. Thank you for this day. Thank you for this life and for the woman sitting across from me. Amen." "Amen," Beatrice echoed. They ate their breakfast, and afterward Samuel said, "We need to ride out to that valley today. Start measuring it out, planning where to build the new house. The sooner we file the homestead claim, the sooner we can start proving up the land." "How long do we have to prove it up?" 5 years. "We have to build a dwelling, cultivate part of the land, live on it. Then it is ours free and clear." 5 years, Beatrice repeated. It seemed like both a long time and no time at all. "What happens if we fail, if we cannot make it work?" "Then we will have tried, and that is all anyone can do, but I do not plan on failing, not with you by my side." They spent the morning riding out to the valley, walking the land, discussing where to build and how to manage the water from the creek. Samuel showed her how to read the land, how to tell good grazing from bad, how to identify landmarks. She was a quick study, asking questions and absorbing information like a sponge. In the afternoon, they returned to the cabin, and Samuel worked on paperwork for the homestead claim while Beatrice made bread. The simple domesticity of it felt profound. They were building a life together, one small moment at a time. That evening, Sarah Hawthorne rode out to visit, bringing a basket of preserves as a wedding gift. She stayed for supper, and the three of them talked late into the night about town news and ranch plans. Before she left, Sarah pulled Beatrice aside. "You look happy," she said. "Really, truly happy. I am glad for you. I am happy. Happier than I ever thought I could be. Hold on to that. The years ahead will not always be easy, but if you have love, real love, you can weather anything." The weeks passed into months, and summer turned to fall. They filed the homestead claim and began building the new house in the valley, a larger structure with 2 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. Samuel hired a few ranch hands to help with the work, men who were respectful to Beatrice and good workers. The cattle herd grew as Samuel bought more stock, reinvesting every dollar of profit back into the ranch. Beatrice learned to ride well, to manage the chickens they added for eggs, to make soap and candles and all the 100 things a ranch wife needed to know. Her hands grew calloused and her skin tanned despite her best efforts with bonnets. She looked nothing like the Boston lady who had arrived in Fort Worth months ago, and she did not miss that woman at all. In November, Beatrice realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, then told Samuel one evening after supper, "I think I am with child." He stared at her for a long moment, and then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Put me down before you make me sick," she said, but she was laughing too. He set her down carefully, his hands going to her still flat stomach. "A baby," he repeated, wonderment in his voice. "We need to get you to a doctor. Make sure everything is all right." "I am fine. Women have been having babies for thousands of years without doctors hovering over them. Even so, I want you checked. I want to know you are healthy, that the baby is healthy." She covered his hands with hers. "All right. We will go to town next week." The doctor confirmed what Beatrice already knew. She was about 8 weeks along, due in late June or early July. He gave her instructions about rest and nutrition, and Samuel listened to every word like it was gospel. On the ride home, he was quiet, thoughtful. Finally, he said, "I want our child to grow up safe, to have opportunities, to not know the kind of hardship I knew. We will make sure of it. Together. My stepfather used to beat me until I could not stand. I swore if I ever had children, I would never raise a hand to them in anger." Beatrice reached over and squeezed his arm. "You will be a wonderful father. I know that as surely as I know anything." As her pregnancy progressed, the new house was completed. They moved in just before Christmas, and Beatrice spent a happy week arranging their furniture and belongings in the larger space. She set up the second bedroom as a nursery, sewing curtains and blankets in her spare time. Christmas was simple but perfect. They rode into Fort Worth for church services, and Beatrice found herself actually enjoying the hymns and the sense of community. Afterward, several families invited them for dinner, but they declined politely. They wanted to spend the day alone in their new house, celebrating their first Christmas together. Samuel gave her a rocking chair he had made himself, smooth and sturdy, perfect for nursing a baby. She gave him a shirt she had sewn, with careful stitches and a monogram on the pocket. They were small gifts, but meaningful. Winter was mild by Boston standards, though the Texans complained about the cold. Beatrice spent the short, gray days preparing for the baby, knitting and sewing and nesting. Samuel worked on expanding the herd and improving the property, always with an eye toward the future. In March, he came home one day looking troubled. "I heard news in town. Gregory Whitmore's store is being foreclosed on. He is losing everything." Beatrice felt a complicated mix of emotions. Pity for any man losing his livelihood, but also a sense of having dodged a bullet. What will he do? Leave town, probably. Start over somewhere else if he is smart. Samuel looked at her. "You could have been his wife. You could have been losing everything right now. But I am not. I am here with you, gaining everything." He pulled her into his arms as much as her growing belly would allow. "What did I do to deserve you? You stopped a wedding. You taught me how to skin a rabbit. And you taught me how to say grace." They kissed, slow and sweet, and Beatrice felt their baby move between them, a flutter that made them both laugh in delight. Spring came in a rush of green grass and wildflowers. Beatrice was large and uncomfortable now, her ankles swelling and her back aching, but she had never felt more alive. Samuel hovered over her, worried about every twinge and pain, until she finally told him to stop being ridiculous. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "Not my woman. Not my child." In late June, on a hot afternoon when the air hung heavy and still, Beatrice felt the first pains. She was hanging laundry when it happened, a tightening across her belly that made her pause. She waited, counting the minutes until the next one came. When they started coming regularly, she went inside and sent one of the ranch hands to fetch Samuel from the far pasture. He arrived within the hour, dusty and worried. "Is it time?" "I think so, but it could be hours yet. First babies take a while." He sent another hand to fetch the midwife from town, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had delivered half the babies in Fort Worth. Then he paced the house like a caged animal while Beatrice tried to rest between contractions. Mrs. Patterson arrived by evening, calm and competent, and took charge of the situation. She examined Beatrice and declared everything was progressing normally. "First babies are slow, but she is young and healthy. Should be fine." The labor was long and hard. Beatrice had known it would hurt, but the reality was worse than she imagined. Pain came in waves, cresting and breaking, leaving her gasping. Samuel stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her face with a cool cloth, whispering encouragement. "You can do this. You are the strongest person I know. Just a little longer." Dawn was breaking when their son finally came into the world, announcing his arrival with a lusty cry. Mrs. Patterson cleaned him and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Beatrice's arms. "A boy," she said unnecessarily. "Big and healthy. Good lungs on him." Beatrice looked down at her son, at his red face and dark hair, and felt her heart expand to hold more love than she knew was possible. Samuel leaned over them both, his face full of awe and tears streaming unashamedly down his cheeks. "He is perfect," Samuel whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you." They named him Simon Theodore Quinn, Simon for Samuel's father and Theodore for Beatrice's. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Beatrice felt like she had been torn apart and put back together in a different configuration, but she had never been happier. Samuel was a devoted father, taking Simon in his arms whenever he could, talking to him seriously about cattle and ranching even though the baby could not possibly understand. He got up in the night to change diapers and bring the baby to Beatrice for nursing, then rock him back to sleep afterward. "You do not have to do all that," Beatrice told him one night. "That is traditionally women's work. Tradition is just another word for the way things have always been done. Does not mean it is the right way. He is my son too. I want to take care of him." As Simon grew from infant to baby, the ranch prospered. The cattle herd expanded, the land proved fertile, and beef prices stayed steady. They hired more hands, including a young man named Daniel who had a gift with horses. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, hardship and joy. When Simon was 2 years old, Beatrice became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy was easier. Their daughter was born in April of 1882, a quick and relatively easy labor that left Mrs. Patterson shaking her head in amazement. "Some women get easier with practice," she said. "You are one of the lucky ones." They named her Mary Catherine Quinn, and she was as different from Simon as night from day. Where he had been placid and easy, she was fierce and demanding. But she had her father's gray-green eyes and her mother's dark hair, and both parents fell completely in love with her. Life with 2 small children was chaotic and exhausting and wonderful. Beatrice often thought back to that day in Fort Worth when she had stood at the altar about to make the worst mistake of her life, and how Samuel had burst through the door to save her. Everything good in her life had flowed from that moment. One evening in the summer of 1883, they were sitting on the porch watching Simon play in the yard while Mary slept on Beatrice's lap. Samuel reached over and took her hand. "You ever regret it?" he asked. choosing this life instead of going back east. Never, not once. Do you? Only regret I have is not meeting you sooner. We could have had more years together. We have many years ahead of us still, God willing. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, cattle lowed. A coyote called and another answered. The sounds of their life, their world. We should say grace, Beatrice said, before a meal. No, just in general for all of this. She gestured at the house, the land, their children. Samuel bowed his head and she did the same. Thank you for this life. Thank you for this family. Thank you for the woman beside me and the children we are raising. Thank you for second chances and new beginnings. Amen. Amen, Beatrice whispered. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growth of their children. Simon grew tall and serious, already interested in cattle and ranching at a young age. Mary was a whirlwind, fearless and adventurous, climbing trees and chasing chickens and keeping everyone on their toes. In 1884, they proved up their homestead claim after 5 years of living on and improving the land. The 160 acres was officially theirs, free and clear. Samuel framed the deed and hung it on the wall, a symbol of what they had built together. They had more children as the years went on. Another boy in 1885, whom they named Daniel. Twin girls in 1887, Rebecca and Ruth. Their house rang with noise and laughter, with arguments and play, with all the chaos of a large and loving family. Beatrice learned to be a ranch wife in truth, capable and strong, managing a household and helping with the work. She could ride, shoot, birth calves, tend sick animals, and do 100 other things that would have seemed impossible to her younger self. But she also kept something of who she had been. She taught all her children to read, instilled in them a love of books and learning. She insisted on saying grace before every meal, a moment of gratitude in busy days. Samuel grew more weathered as the years passed, his face lined from sun and work, but he was happy. The ranch prospered, growing to over 1,000 acres and 500 head of cattle. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were secure, comfortable, building something that would last. In 1890, Samuel and Beatrice celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary. Their children ranged from Simon at 11 down to the 3-year-old twins. Sarah Hawthorne and her family came out to help them celebrate, and they had a feast with music and dancing. That night, after the guests had left and the children were in bed, Samuel and Beatrice walked out to the creek in the valley where they had first talked about homesteading the land. The cottonwood trees were larger now, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. 10 years, Samuel said. Feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I want you to know something, Beatrice Quinn. These 10 years with you have been the best of my life. Every morning I wake up grateful. Every night I go to sleep counting my blessings, and you are the biggest blessing of all. Tears filled her eyes. You saved me, Samuel. That day in the church, you saved my life. No, we saved each other. I was just going through the motions before you came. Working the ranch, surviving, but not really living. You taught me what it meant to have something worth working for, someone to build a life with. You taught me how to skin a rabbit, he laughed. That I did. Remember how squeamish you were? I remember thinking I would never manage it. But you were patient with me. You taught me how to say grace, how to be grateful for what I have instead of always wanting more. We taught each other, Beatrice said. That is what marriage is, I think, teaching each other how to be better than we were alone. He kissed her then, sweet and deep, and she tasted salt from her own tears. They stood by the creek as the stars came out, holding each other, counting their blessings. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges but always love. They weathered droughts and floods, cattle disease and market crashes, all the trials that came with ranching. But they weathered them together, their partnership strong and sure. Their children grew and found their own paths. Simon stayed on the ranch, working beside his father and eventually taking over more of the management. Mary married a cowboy from a neighboring ranch, scandalizing no one, because by then everyone knew that Mary Quinn would do exactly as she pleased. Daniel went to college in Austin, the first in the family to pursue higher education, and came back with a degree in agricultural science that he used to improve their ranching methods. Rebecca and Ruth were inseparable, running the household and helping with the children that their older siblings began having. The Quinn Ranch became a sprawling enterprise with multiple generations working together, a dynasty built from nothing but will and work and love. In the spring of 1900, Samuel and Beatrice celebrated their 20th anniversary. They were in their late 40s now, graying and lined but still strong. The ranch had grown to over 2,000 acres, one of the largest in the county. Their 5 children were all grown or nearly so, and there were 3 grandchildren with more on the way. They took a trip, just the 2 of them, riding out to the valley where they had first imagined their future together. The house they had built there was occupied by Simon and his young family now, but they had built another house on a different part of the property, a comfortable home where they planned to eventually retire. 20 years, Beatrice said. Do you remember what you said at our 10th anniversary? About how it felt like forever and no time at all. I do. It still feels that way. Maybe it always will. They sat on the porch of the house that Simon now occupied, the house they had built with their own hands all those years ago. Beatrice thought about the girl she had been, stepping off the stagecoach in Fort Worth, terrified and alone and trying so hard to be brave. She would not recognize the woman she had become, strong and capable, mother and grandmother, ranch matriarch. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not stopped the wedding? Samuel asked. Sometimes. But it is like thinking about a book I never read. That was a different story, a different life. This is the life I am living, and I would not trade it for anything. Not even for your old life in Boston. With the theaters and libraries and all those things you gave up. Those things were nice, but they were not real. Not in the way this is real. The work we do here matters. The family we have built matters. That is worth more than all the theaters in the world. He reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. They had held hands like this thousands of times over the years, a simple gesture that never lost its meaning. I love you, Beatrice Quinn. I loved you from the moment I saw you standing alone outside the church, looking at the prairie like you were trying to decide whether to walk into it. I loved you when I taught you to skin that rabbit and you did not quit even though I could see it made you sick. I loved you when you taught me to say grace, to find gratitude in simple things. And I love you now after 20 years, after 5 children, after all the joys and sorrows we have shared. I will love you until the day I die and beyond. She turned to him, her eyes bright with tears. That was quite a speech, Samuel Quinn. It is all true. I know, and I love you too, more than I have words for. You gave me a life I never imagined I could have. You gave me myself, the person I was always meant to be. They kissed, a kiss that held 20 years of love and partnership and commitment. When they broke apart, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. As twilight deepened, Samuel said, "Should we say grace?" "Yes. But this time you say it." All of it, not just the short version. He thought for a moment, then bowed his head. She did the same, their hands still clasped together. "Thank you for this life. Thank you for the woman beside me, who is my partner in all things, who makes every day better just by being in it. Thank you for our children, all 5 of them, healthy and strong and good people. Thank you for our grandchildren and the ones yet to come. Thank you for this land, for the cattle, for the work that gives our days meaning. Thank you for challenges that make us stronger and joys that make life sweet. Thank you for second chances and new beginnings. Thank you for grace, both the kind we say before meals and the deeper kind that forgives our failings and lets us try again. Thank you for love, which is the greatest gift of all. Amen. Amen, Beatrice whispered, her voice thick with emotion. They sat together as the stars came out one by one, filling the vast Texas sky. In the distance, cattle lowed and settled for the night. Somewhere an owl called. The sounds of their world, their life, their love. This was not the life Beatrice had planned when she answered that advertisement and traveled to Fort Worth as a mail-order bride. It was so much better than anything she could have planned. It was messy and hard and perfect. It was real in a way that her old life had never been. She thought about that day in the church when Samuel had burst through the door to stop her wedding. She thought about the scandal and fear and uncertainty that followed. She thought about the day he taught her to skin a rabbit, patient and kind, showing her how to survive in this harsh land. She thought about the evening she taught him to say grace, to find gratitude in simple things. All of it had led to this moment, sitting on a porch with the man she loved, surrounded by the life they had built together. Every choice, every challenge, every joy and sorrow had woven together into something beautiful. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked. "Everything. Nothing, just how happy I am. Me too." They sat in the gathering darkness, hands clasped, hearts full. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that would last for generations. 2 people who had taught each other what really mattered: gratitude, partnership, and love. The prairie stretched out around them, vast and endless, full of possibility. And in that moment, Beatrice Quinn knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. It was grace, all of it. Grace unexpected and undeserved and perfect. Grace that had transformed a frightened mail-order bride into a strong ranch wife. Grace that had transformed a solitary cowboy into a husband and father. Grace that had taken 2 broken people and made them whole. As the years continued to roll forward, the Quinn Ranch became a landmark in the region. Other ranches came and went, but the Quinns endured, adapting to changing times while holding fast to the values that had built their success. Hard work, integrity, family, faith, and always gratitude. Samuel and Beatrice grew old together, their hair turning white, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. They watched their children raise children of their own, passing down the lessons they had learned. Work hard, be honest, say grace before meals, remember where you came from. Love fiercely and without reservation. On a warm summer evening in 1920, Samuel and Beatrice sat on the porch of their retirement house, now genuinely retired as Simon ran the ranch with his own sons helping. They were both in their 70s, weathered by time but still vital, still present, still deeply in love. 40 years, Beatrice marveled. "We have been married for 40 years. Best 40 years of my life. Mine too. Though those first hours after Simon was born were rough," he laughed. "You were magnificent. I have never been so scared or so proud in my life." They talked about their children and grandchildren, a sprawling clan now. They talked about the ranch and how it had changed and grown. They talked about Fort Worth, which had grown from a rough frontier town into a proper city with streetcars and electric lights. "Remember when you stepped off that stagecoach?" Samuel asked. "You looked so out of place, so Boston proper in your gray dress and hat. I was terrified. But I was trying so hard not to show it. I know. That is what I admired about you from the start. You were scared, but you did not let it stop you. And you rode into that church and stopped the wedding. That took courage too. It was not courage, it was necessity. I could not let you marry him. I could not watch another woman throw her life away on Gregory Whitmore. Is that really why you did it? To save me from him? He was quiet for a long moment. Partly, but also because from the moment I saw you, I knew. I knew you were meant for me and I was meant for you. I know that sounds foolish. It does not sound foolish at all. I felt it too, though I did not understand it at the time. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, their children and grandchildren gathered for Sunday supper, a tradition that had been established years ago. The house filled with noise and laughter, with children running and adults talking, with all the beautiful chaos of a large, loving family. Before the meal, everyone gathered around the long table that Samuel had built decades ago. The food was spread out, a feast of roasted meat and vegetables, fresh bread, pies, and cakes. 20 people crowded around, 3 generations of Quinns. Who is saying grace tonight? Simon asked. Grandpa should, one of the grandchildren piped up. Samuel looked around the table at all these faces, all these people who existed because he and Beatrice had found each other 4 decades ago. His throat grew tight with emotion. All right then. He bowed his head and everyone else did the same. Beatrice reached over and took his hand, and then everyone at the table joined hands, a circle of family and love. Thank you for this food and the hands that prepared it. Thank you for this family, every single person at this table. Thank you for the life that Beatrice and I have built together, for 40 years of partnership and love. Thank you for the ranch and the land and the work that sustains us. Thank you for grace, which saved us and keeps saving us every single day. Thank you for teaching us what matters, not wealth or status or comfort, but love and family and gratitude. And thank you for the lesson we learned all those years ago, that true wealth is measured not in what we have, but in who we have beside us. Amen. Amen, echoed around the table, voices young and old blending together. They ate and talked and laughed, celebrating another Sunday, another meal, another moment of being together. And Beatrice looked at Samuel across the crowded table, this man who had taught her to skin a rabbit and so much more. This man who had shown her how to be strong, how to survive, how to thrive in a harsh land. This man who had given her 5 children and a life beyond her wildest dreams. He caught her looking and smiled, that smile that still made her heart skip even after 40 years. She smiled back, and in that smile was everything they had been to each other, everything they had built, everything they had become. Later, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, they sat on the porch in their rocking chairs, the ones Samuel had made years ago. The night was warm and clear, stars brilliant in the darkness. You remember what you said to me that first night I stayed at your cabin? Beatrice asked. When you showed me the spare room, I said you could stay as long as you needed, that I would not expect anything from you. And you kept that promise. You never pushed, never demanded. You let me come to you in my own time. It was the only way it could work. You needed to choose this life, not have it forced on you. I chose well. So did I. They rocked in silence, the chairs creaking gently. Beatrice thought about all the years, all the moments big and small that had accumulated into a life. She thought about the girl she had been and the woman she had become. She thought about the journey that had brought her from Boston to Texas, from one life to another, from one version of herself to something entirely different and infinitely better. Samuel. Yes, love. Thank you. For what? For everything. for stopping the wedding, for taking me in, for teaching me how to live here, for loving me, for giving me this life." He reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically, a gesture worn smooth by repetition but never losing its meaning. "The thanks go both ways. You civilized me, Beatrice Quinn. You taught me that there was more to life than work and survival. You taught me about grace and gratitude and love. You made me a better man. We made each other better. That is what love does." They sat together as the night deepened. Two old people who had loved each other for 40 years and would love each other until death parted them. And even then, the love would not end. It would continue in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built, in the lessons they had taught, in the grace they had learned to recognize and honor. The story that had begun with a cowboy bursting through church doors to stop a wedding had grown into something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. It had become a legacy, a testament to the power of love and partnership and stubborn determination. It had become a life well lived, full of joy and sorrow, triumph and failure, but always, always love. As they finally rose to go inside, Samuel paused at the door and looked back at the land spread out before them. His land, their land, land that would belong to their children and their children's children, land that had been wilderness and was now home. "It was all worth it," he said quietly. "Every hardship, every challenge, every moment of doubt, it was all worth it to end up here with you with this life." Beatrice slipped her arm through his. "I know. I feel the same way." They went inside together and the door closed behind them, shutting out the night. But the love remained warm and constant, a fire that had burned for 40 years and would burn until the end of time. This was their story. The story of a cowboy who taught a city bride to skin a rabbit, and the bride who taught him to say grace before eating it. The story of two people who found each other against all odds and built something that would last forever. It was a love story, pure and simple. The kind that does not happen often, but when it does, changes everything. The kind that starts with a dramatic moment but is sustained by 1,000 small ones. The kind that teaches us what really matters in life. Not wealth or status or comfort, but love and partnership and gratitude. The kind of love story that makes you believe in grace.